Welcome to This Week in Prophecy with James Jacob Prash, presented by Maury LTV.
My name is Joshua, live this week, January 19th, 2019. Jacob.
Blessings in Jesus, dear friends. Wonderful to be with you. Looking forward to seeing our friends in the United States, specifically New York, Pennsylvania, California in the near future, as well as in Texas. And then looking forward to seeing our friends in New Zealand and in Australia. And finally, back in the United States, and then our friends in Canada, where we have our Canada Conference. All these things coming up this summer into the autumn. The details are available on the website, moriel.org. We'll be in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, twice to the USA, be everywhere from the Bible Belt, conferences in Texas and California, as well as our usual venues in New York and elsewhere, in addition to our Canadian conference in the Vancouver area. Hope you can join us. But let's move on to This Week in Prophecy. This Week in Prophecy, the events in the Middle East begin once again to dominate the prophetic significance of what seems to be unfolding. Following the downing 2 weeks ago of an American reconnaissance drone by the Iranians, the United States this week downed an Iranian drone. It is unclear if it was an advanced model, such as their Sagan 2 reconnaissance drone, or if it was a less sophisticated model. Has not been announced. However, it was harassing the USS Boxer, an old aircraft carrier that was refurbished to carry helicopters and Marines as an amphibious landing craft. It was well built, so it was simply modernized and refurbished for other purposes. It was on patrol in the Straits of Hormuz, carrying a Marine contingent, after Iran announced its plans to upgrade its uranium enrichment in violation of the agreements that it still has with Europe, although the United States withdrew from it. It was, of course, made by the Obama administration with John Kerry. President Trump withdrew from it. More about that in a moment. The drone was harassing the American military vessel, according to the claims of the White House and the Pentagon, and it was downed by interesting means. It was not downed by a missile or a projectile or by artillery or by anti-aircraft fire. It was downed by purely electronic means. This is being underreported in the press. There is obviously an advanced technology that combines jamming technology that has already existed with some kind of means to countermand an aircraft's function and to cause it to crash. Very advanced form of anti-aircraft defense that the United States is pioneering, and some have speculated it will begin to make missile systems obsolete once it is developed and perfected to a higher technical standard. But this is the first time that we are aware that this advanced technology has actually been used in combat. Jamming has been used, but never to actually bring down a aircraft, howbeit an unmanned one, a drone. More will be seen about this technology in the future, no doubt, but the USA appears to be at the forefront of this kind of anti-aircraft technology that does not even need missiles. This may explain why the United States upgraded the Patriot missile system and the Thaad missile systems, but did not seek to make something on a par with the new Russian S-400 systems. The United States may be going in a different direction, using electronic countermeasures as a means to bring down missiles, projectiles, aircraft. It may be the case. Be that as it may, This Week in Prophecy, armed conflict took place once more between the United States and Iran. Now the score is even, 1-1. Meanwhile, American sanctions continue to affect the Iranian economy very seriously, and We know that cyber warfare has been underway for some months, but let's continue. This takes place against the background of the Royal Navy and Royal Marines at Gibraltar seizing an Iranian ship in violation of the sanctions. The Iranians have also claimed to have seized a ship and a crew of 12, probably from a ship flagged in Panama, claiming that it was trafficking in oil illegally. The White House has demanded other countries step up to the plate and take a role in patrolling the Straits of Hormuz in the face of Iranian aggression. 20% of the world's oil goes to the Straits of Hormuz. Now, what is very interesting is this. Very little of that oil comes to the United States. Very little. Only about 8% of Saudi exports come to the United States, or have ever done, and now it is, if anything, less with fracking. We also see that following this, the price of oil dropped down to about $55 a barrel from its previous high. These kinds of incidents used to send the price of oil soaring. Now the price of oil has come down in the face of it. Events are very different than they used to be in the Middle East, and these things all have prophetic significance. But what we see once more is the usual wimpish European pandering to Islamic aggression and seeking the profits of European corporations above their own security interests. Germany's, with Angela Merkel being at the forefront of this, joined by the French. The one ally America had is the one it has always had. It is the British who have stood by the United States in the Straits of Hormuz. The Royal Navy dispatched a British warship to protect a British vessel being threatened by the Iranians. The Iranians threatened an act of piracy against British merchant vessels in response to the British detention of the Iranian tanker in Gibraltar. When Iran made the move, the Royal Navy, supported by reconnaissance from the U.S. Navy and Air Force, was there quickly. Hence, it is the Anglo-American relationship that is the real basis of NATO, not the rest of NATO. Although, under pressure from the Trump administration, the other NATO partners finally coughed up paying something closer to their fair share of the NATO budget. They've increased expenditure under pressure from the United States. The strength shown consistently by Mr. Trump. Don't expect us to protect you if you're not going to pay your share. Don't expect the American taxpayer to fund your defense when you're capable of defending your own. You have to share the burden with us. This is something that should have been done a very long time ago, but it was not. There was pandering to the Saudi Arabians by oil interests in the United States who controlled the Bush dynasty and others. The United States protecting Saudi Arabian oil exports at the expense of the American consumer, so Saudi Arabia could sell oil to Japan or to China. This was crazy. This was crazy. But there has been a shift in the strategic and diplomatic thinking and policies of the United States under the present administration. Events in the Middle East continue, however, to line themselves up with biblical prophecy, particularly the book of Daniel, chapter 10. Close to the Iraqi border, inside Saudi Arabia, American military personnel, mainly U.S. Army, at least 500, have been deployed on the ground, boots on the ground, operating Patriot anti-missile systems, as well as other detection apparatus and guidance systems. There's also reports of American Army engineers constructing or expanding an existing runway. This in itself is very interesting. It is the area, of course, where Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Iran come together near the Sha'at al-Arab at the mouth of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This is an area of tremendous biblical significance, but now the United States is there once again for the first time in a conspicuous way since the first Gulf War. The United States has always been shy about placing American military forces inside of Saudi Arabia. What was usually done is defense contractors hired former U.S. military personnel with specialized skills in military engineering and the like as advisors, and they would be recruited as civilian advisors when in fact they were soldiers, airmen, sailors in civilian suits. That is how it was always done. Still is done. But now we see actual deployment of uniformed American troops. There is also talk of the United States and Israel stepping up airstrikes on Iranian targets in Syria in response to the Iranian threats. Again, things are not receding. This Week in Prophecy. This Week in Prophecy, the first delivery of the Russian S-400 anti-missile systems were delivered to Turkey. This has put Turkey on the blacklist of the F-35. The United States and Israel have been modifying avionics packages to make it possible for the F-35 and probably the F-22 to be able to operate in areas protected by the S-400 undetected using stealth and other technologies. They do not want any of this technology to fall into the hands of Russia when you will need Russian technicians and advisors to assist in the maintenance of the S-400 system. It is all going to be a matter of military and industrial espionage. Hence, the F-35 will not be sold to Turkey. It is probable that the best way for the United States and the West and Israel to deal with Turkey is by a political shift inside the country. The Erdogan political party had major losses in the recent by-elections inside Turkey. Whether or not he can be electorally deposed democratically or not is a question. Relations between U.S. and Turkey have remained sour due to American friendship to Kurdish forces in northern Iraq, as the only Iraqis the Americans in the West know they can trust. They've been allied with the Americans against ISIS and against pro-Assad forces inside of Syria. This is much to the anger of Turkey. This week in the Kurdish regional capital, Erbil, in Kurdistan, 3 Turkish diplomats were assassinated, almost certainly, according to the Turks, by the PKK, by the Kurdish Liberation Movement. Hence, the hatred and the fear of a Turkish uprising inside of Turkey by Kurds wanting to control their homeland. While the Kurds on the opposite side of the border, their kinsmen in Iraq and Syria, are aligned with the Americans, have created further strains within NATO in relations with Turkey. This brings a question over the status of the Incirlik Air Base. Turkey does not wish to withdraw from NATO, but the present regime in Turkey wishes to have its cake and eat it too. The situation in Turkey is one where the Obama administration refused to sell Turkey the Patriot missile systems. Thus, they went shopping elsewhere. China, India are all purchasing the S-400. This restricts the marketability of the F-35 to prevent valuable technology falling into the hands of Mr. Putin. But let's move on. This Week in Prophecy, Mr. Netanyahu announced that he will have to make the decision personally whether to allow 2 members of the United States Congress, both of them favorable to radical Islam and haters of Israel and supporters of the disinvestment movement and boycott movement, We speak of two members of the so-called squad. We speak of Omar from Minnesota and Tliab. When Tliab was elected, instead of donning an American flag, she put on a Palestinian flag and began dancing. She is the congresswoman from Gaza. She has no business being in the American Congress. She's not there to represent American interest. She danced with the foreign flag of a terrorist entity that controls Gaza, Hamas. Nonetheless, she wants to come to Israel to make trouble, obviously, in the media and to draw media attention together with Omar, who is not only anti-Zionist, but has made statements supportive of Islamic terror in both the United States and in the Horn of Africa. She has made statements that most people deem to be quite anti-Semitic and even anti-American. But she wants to come with Tliab to Israel to put on a media circus. Mr. Netanyahu has a standard policy adopted by the Israeli government not to allow supporters of the boycott and disinvestment movement into Israel. At the moment, we have Omar trying to push legislation through the House of Representatives that would outlaw any kind of ban on the disinvestment and boycott movement against Israel, which is at the present time generally not legal. Be that as it may, they want to come and they want to have a media spectacle. Mr. Netanyahu must make the decision. The standard policy is to keep such people out, but as they are members of the U.S. Congress, there are other implications diplomatically and politically. Given the recent fallout of the so-called squad with Mr. Trump, Mr. Netanyahu's hand may be strengthened in banning them. Fewer people are less likely to take offense. They played the usual hand against Mr. Trump because Omar is black. Mr. Trump becomes a racist for opposing her statements against Israel, her anti-Semitism, and her statements that are favorable to radical Islam. Because he criticizes this, he's a racist simply on the basis of the fact that she's black. Or with Tliab on the basis of the fact she's a woman. They simply play the identity card in terms of race and gender. That is the standard response of the left. And it's taking place this week in prophecy. Many people are fed up with it. I wish more people were fed up with it. But the left-wing press continues to promote it this week. Let's look at what else is transpiring this week in prophecy. The events in the Straits of Hormuz are eclipsing most of the news reporting taking place this week from the Middle East. But a Russian corvette, a kind of small destroyer or frigate that has a guided missile capacity, sailed from the Caspian Sea through a canal into the Black Sea and then through the Dardanelles and the Bosporus Straits into the Mediterranean, and is now taking up station off the shore of Syria, continuing the Russian military buildup in the eastern Mediterranean. What is Russia's interest? We've again explored these things concerning the Leviathan oil field and other factors that may come into play eventually. But Russia is definitely posturing and positioning itself strategically. This week in prophecy. This week in prophecy, the events in Iran were uncovered for what they really are. The Iranian regime is being forced to admit certain things it does not like to. It has denied that one of its drones was downed by the United States, even suggesting the USA downed one of its own drones. Be that as it may, we know that the price of oil has receded this week again, and that Iran's exports have gone from 2.8 million barrels per day 2.8 million barrels per day last year to 0.3. In other words, 30,000 barrels a day from nearly 3 million. This is strangling the Iranian economy. Javad Zarif, the foreign minister, has stated that if these American sanctions are removed, Iran will negotiate and allow the enhanced inspections of its nuclear enrichment facilities that Barack Obama agreed not to have, that John Kerry agreed not to have. You had to take the word of the Iranians. They were abiding by it. They would not allow up-to-date and even does spontaneous inspections by any independent international body. There was no real verification. Iran was able to violate the provisions of the agreement without anybody knowing it, and to do so with the blessings of the Obama administration. This was unacceptable to Donald Trump, who said there must be independent verification of Iranian compliance, despite the objections of Angela Merkel and many of the Europeans. But this week in prophecy, Javad Zarif, the foreign minister of Iran, said Iran is prepared to negotiate on such inspections if the Americans will lift the embargoes and sanctions. Again, strong leadership getting the kind of results that the weak leadership of the previous administration could not. We continue to urge prayers for Mr. Trump and his administration. Again, I am a political independent. I am neither a Democrat nor a Republican. In Britain, I am neither Labour nor Conservative. In Israel, I am neither Likud or Marak. I'm an independent. However, I pray for whoever is in power. And right now, we have someone in power who has pulled one success in the Middle East after another. Continue to pray for him. This week in prophecy. This week in prophecy has seen new reactions in the British Parliament against Boris Johnson's pledge to pull Britain out with a hard Brexit and no agreement from the European Union. It involved Europhile members of the British Conservative Party, much the same as the American Republican Party is divided between conservatives and hypocrites, between conservatives and establishment Republicans who are really the same as Democrats, between people like Romney and the Bush family and so forth, and people who are actually conservatives. The British Conservative Party is similarly divided between the actual conservatives and those more than happy to make Britain an offshore colony of Europe and to get into bed with the Labour Party in order to do it. This is creating a difficult political environment for Mr. Johnson. We urge prayer for Brexit and for Mr. Johnson, and that the Lord who establishes kings and removes kings, as we're told in Daniel, will remove these pseudo-conservatives from the British Tory party. Again, Mr. Johnson has made it clear that he is a supporter of Zionism, and he identifies himself as a Zionist. This week in prophecy, we see the spiritual battle over Europe and Britain continuing. Once more, it is Daniel chapter 2. They are trying to make the iron stick to the clay. This week in prophecy, we've seen political antics becoming almost frantic within the American political system. The establishment Republicans to date have not been able to mount anybody with the pull or leverage within the party to unseat Mr. Trump as the party's nominee to be reelected. The establishment Republicans are politically weak at the present time. But also the Democratic Party is politically divided. with open confrontation between old-style Democrats such as Joseph Biden and Kamala Harris. Harris's stock has risen in California, but not nationally. People like Buttigieg have faded to nothing. Bernie Sanders has seen deterioration in most of his ratings. People like Gillibrand have gone absolutely nowhere fast. This leaves the one called Pocahontas, Elizabeth Warren, who claims or is claimed to be of American Indian descent. She has been an opponent of pro-Israel, pro-Zionist Americans. She pushed for a criminal investigation of Elliot Broidy, a supporter of Israel and a financial supporter of Mr. Trump from New York, on the basis of the allegation that as vice chairman of Mr. Trump's inauguration committee, he met with people in the business world from abroad who were in a position to make deals with him. There's no evidence that he misused his position or that he violated any federal statute. There's no evidence. She just demanded an investigation for politically motivated reasons, even though there's no real evidence. They're playing the same game as they did with the Russian collusion. These are desperate people. This is Elizabeth Warren. This is what they're forced to resort to. They cannot deal with substance. They do not have ideas. They cannot deny that there's been improvements in the economy and in the national security situation abroad. They cannot deny these things. So they have to resort to scandal mongering. Quite a situation. When there's no evidence, there should be no investigation. The evidence is spurious. But that's what you're dealing with. Unprincipled people. They play the race card, the gender card, identity politics. That's all they have. In other words, they have nothing except the mainstream media. Fortunately, the mainstream media is losing power and influence. Now, again, I'm not doing TV commercials for Fox News or for One America News, which are less biased. I'm not a political activist on behalf of Mr. Trump. I simply realize the direction the American left wants to drag this country is one of destruction. Barack Obama put the United States on the path to decline. That is being reversed. Minorities are particularly the beneficiaries of the policies of the present administration. The only thing I'm appealing for is prayer and that God's justice will prevail. These things have all come into play this week in prophecy. Finally, in the United States, as the political environment intensifies, it also intensifies in Israel. In Israel, this week, the Labor Party, headed by Amir Peretz, has made a coalition agreement with the Gesher Party to form a common ticket to run against Benjamin Netanyahu. This is the political situation in Israel I witnessed last week. Many Israelis, secular Israelis, who even like Mr. Netanyahu, are concerned that in order to keep power under the coalition system, he must make deals with the religious parties, who are seen as parasites, charlatans, and perpetrators of political blackmail. We will be having an editorial shortly on the subversion of the Israeli judiciary by the rabbinic authorities coming from Reuben Rothler within the next week, hopefully. We need to look at this particular issue. In Israel, the left, unable to win electorally, is beginning to fight legally. But there is one difference. Mr. Trump has a straight playing field. Mr. Netanyahu does not. He is forced into league with these religious parties. Otherwise, he will lose power to the left. And a lot of people who, like him, don't like the Jewish religious parties. I watched the TV advert in Israel last week of former Prime Minister Rosh Hamamshalah Ehud Barak, and part of his focused attack on Mr. Netanyahu was Mr. Netanyahu's coalition agreements with the religious extremist parties. This is taking place. Israel has had a failed election. I would pray that the power of the religious parties are sequestered, but that the Israeli left does not come to power. Now, Ehud Barak was a noble general. He's not a crazy leftist in the American sense of the people we have in Congress and so forth. He's quite different. He made viable proposals for peace with the Palestinians, the Palestinian Arabs, the Palestinian Authority, which they very flatly rejected. Be that as it may, he wants to have another chance at doing something he failed to do. This is what is going on in Israel, and it's going on this week in prophecy. As we always point out, however, he who keepeth Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Hine lo yanum velo yishan, shomer Israel. My name is James Jacob Prasch. God bless and thank you for listening. Please pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Please pray for Great Britain and Brexit. And please pray for the American government and administration of Mr. Trump. God bless and thank you.